When you think of foreign policy, what do you think of? The military comes to mind. It's hard to ignore drone strikes, Humvees, and aircraft carriers. When and how we use force is an important part of foreign policy, especially for the United States with its military that dwarfs every other military in the world in terms of power and budget. Alternately, if you're more diplomatically minded, foreign relations may make you think of our diplomatic corps. Or perhaps you imagine the president sitting in the Oval Office, mediating between hostile countries and trying to keep the peace. This too is an important part of foreign policy, though it's still focused on war. In this case, it's prevention. But what about all of the foreign nations that aren't at war? What about the more mundane relations between ourselves and other countries, the ones we deal with on a daily basis? There's a whole realm of foreign relations that comes into play far more often and has had far more of an impact on the world than any war. Hi everybody, I'm Charlie and this is Charlie on the Issues. Today's issue? Free trade. Specifically, I'll be talking about why economists like free trade so much and how our increasingly globalized economy has, in fact, led to some real, tangible improvements in quality of life all over the world. First though, I should probably define free trade. Generally, free trade means that countries do not limit the imports or exports of goods to and from other countries. Often this means little or no duties or tariffs on those goods, duties and tariffs being the taxes you pay for importing and exporting goods. That's not to say there are no restrictions on what goods can be traded. Nuclear materials, for instance, are definitely regulated and restricted. Also, often free trade deals do retain tariffs on certain goods in order to protect certain industries within a country. Still, while free trade isn't absolutely free, it's about as free as you can reasonably expect. Now, economists get a bad rap sometimes, especially since their theories about free trade look great on paper, but in real life, free trade may lead to many hardworking people losing their jobs. This was basically the entire point of my last episode in this series, but here's the gist. Generally, it's cheaper and more efficient to have people in other countries handle labor-intensive and manufacturing jobs. At least when we don't just automate them ourselves. Either way, workers tend to get the short end of the stick. As a side note, one could also argue that the countries receiving these manufacturing jobs are also getting the short end of the stick, as the massive rise of industry in many countries tends to lead to a corresponding massive rise in pollution. That said, economists do have a point, and to illustrate this, I'm going to literally illustrate some basic economics. I promise it's not that complicated. Specifically, this has to do with efficiency and comparative advantage. Let's look at a standard, simple economic model, a graph that shows a country's ability to produce two things: butter and guns. Now, here in America, we're awesome at making both of these things, because if there's two things we like here in the United States, it's butter and guns. Now, depending on what America decides to focus on, we can either produce 14 pounds of butter or 20 guns every minute. But only if we focus completely on one or the other. We want both though, so we split the difference. We make 7 pounds of butter and 10 guns every minute. Now in Canada, they also like their guns and butter. There are fewer workers in Canada, but their patented butter-making technology is better than ours, so they can make more with less. As a result, they can either make 12 pounds of butter or 10 guns per minute if they focus completely on one or the other. Again, if they split the difference, they'll end up with 6 pounds of butter and 5 guns per minute. So if both countries split the difference, a total of 13 pounds of butter and 15 guns are made every minute between the two countries. As you can see though, Canada is comparatively better at making butter than guns, while America is comparatively better at making guns than butter. So if the two countries opened up trade with one another, they could start focusing on their specialties. For instance, Canada could focus completely on making butter, while the United States could focus completely on making guns. In that case, between the two countries, we would be making 12 pounds of butter and 20 guns per minute. So compared to each country splitting the difference, we're now making a little less butter and a lot more guns. This is good, but it's not clearly better than the alternative. After all, what if that extra pound of butter per minute was more important than those extra 5 guns? In that case, Canada can continue focusing completely on butter, and the United States will adjust its focus a bit. Based on its original ratio, we can see that the United States produces 7 pounds of butter for every 10 guns it makes per minute. In other words, the United States produces 0.7 pounds of butter for every 1 gun it makes per minute. So if we make 5 fewer guns per minute, we'll make 3.5 more pounds of butter. Now working with Canada, we're making 15.5 pounds of butter and 15 guns every minute. That's a net gain of 2.5 pounds of butter every minute thanks to trade and specialization. Now obviously when trading with other countries, things get a lot more complicated. However, due to the nature of economics and the free market, we would basically be seeing this model come into play thousands of times over, as each country finds things it can do comparatively better than anyone else. And by doing this, we collectively get to take advantage of that metaphorical surplus of 2.5 pounds of butter. That thousands of times over. And this isn't just a theory spouted by a few forward-thinking economists who figured out a cool little math trick they could do using graphs. Support for free trade is practically universal among economists, and they have hard empirical evidence to support this model. Thanks to steadily growing free trade, global standard of living is rising. Even as income inequality gets wider, the meaning of poverty worldwide has changed drastically in the past century, and extreme poverty is steadily declining all over the world. But trade deals aren't just about increasing global productivity. They're also about spreading ideas. Being on good terms with another country doesn't just mean an absence of war, it means talking with them a lot and sharing technologies as our citizens connect and work together. And when we share technologies, we end up improving on each other's designs and steadily improving global technology as a whole, which is great, and it's not the only way we share ideas. Particularly in the United States, we care a lot about human rights. We're generally unwilling to work with countries that use slavery, child labor, or dangerous working conditions. Because of this, we've actually improved working conditions in many countries that we wouldn't otherwise trade with. Basically, as a powerful and attractive economy, we end up having a lot of moral influence over the countries we trade with. And of course, if we take issue with a country's stance on human rights, we attack them first with trade sanctions. In many ways, trade is our most powerful tool and our most powerful weapon when it comes to foreign relations. Trade has shaped human history and progress far more than wars have, and in my opinion, is a far more important foreign relations tool than any army. That said, I'm not going to give a definitive opinion here for or against free trade generally. It's a broad, complex issue with many facets. And for every argument in favor of free trade, there's another argument against it. For instance, specialization is great for productivity, but it may also lead to excessive dependence on other countries for sometimes vital products, concentrated pollution in over-industrialized countries, and a certain lack of free will among workers as they're forced to find work in their country's specialty. Even the benefit of spreading human rights can be a problem, as one could argue that forcing our morality on other countries may lead to a sort of cultural imperialism, where we may also strip away many of the good ways that other countries are unique. Anyway, this episode has been very broad and theoretical, touching on the logic and power of trade without getting into too many specifics. Next time we'll start digging into an actual trade deal to get a feel for what it does and how it works. Specifically, we'll be looking at the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.